Good morning or good afternoon. I want to take a couple minutes and welcome you guys to today's webinar on a practical approach to implementing your CMDB. Before we get started and before I make introductions, my name is Ashley Cornella. I'm the Marketing Manager here at Sharewell Software. I will be the facilitator for today's webinar. And before I make my speaker introduction of Bill, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody on the webinar is muted. This just helps cut down on background noise. So if you guys have questions for Bill today, please submit all of your inquiries in the chat window. And we will leave about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Also, later this afternoon, we will be following this webinar with a recording. And so you'll have an opportunity to view today's presentation as well as submit any questions if you were not able to do so on today's presentation. Today's presentation will be provided to you by Bill Sheridan. He has nearly over 25 years of solution consulting experience. He focuses on leveraging technology products and consulting services to solve customer challenges and really improve your overall business. For the past 12 years, he has held a number of roles at Advanced MarketPlace, a partner of ours here at Sharewell. And he really has been a leader in the IT service management. Currently, as the Chief Strategy Officer, Bill works with technology users, software vendors, and industry experts to identify common business challenges. Today, he will be helping you learn a practical approach to really designing and implementing and expanding your CMDB so that it provides overall value to your organization. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Bill and let him present.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that introduction. So yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is attending today. Thank you very much for joining us. Just real quick, want to make a mention. So today I'm using a tool called Prezi. I'm not using PowerPoint, so we've been experimenting with it a little bit. You'll be able to see all the screens fine, but there may be a little bit of choppiness in the transitions. Prezi is a pretty slick tool, but it doesn't necessarily translate sometimes as cleanly as I'd like, but we'll see how that goes. What I'd like to do is I have a lot of information to cover in a fairly short time, and I want to make sure we leave time for some question and answer sessions. So I will go through some areas very quickly, and then I will park on some areas that I think are really, really important, and we'll spend a little extra time on those. So if it feels like I'm going quickly, I promise to slow down on the areas that are really important. So without further ado, let me just tell you a little bit about our company and our background, our qualifications, only because I think it's important that you understand who's making a recommendation about an approach to implementing a CMDB. We've been in business, Advanced MarketPlace, for about 18 years, strong North America presence. Ashley mentioned Sharewell is a very strategic partner for us, and there are a lot of compelling reasons that I'll touch on this presentation for that. But in general, we grew up in the ITSM, ITIL space, doing consulting there in our early years, have kept that going on for the entire time Advanced MarketPlace has been around. But as an organization today, we really focus in three key areas, and they are very, very interwoven because of what's going on in the market space today with technology. And the solutions we bring to our clients all have a focus on modernization. And what I mean by that is we work with our clients to prepare themselves not only for the things that are happening today, but based on the industry and technology trends that are coming down the road, preparing them for being more competitive, being able to win in their industry going forward. So specifically for Advanced MarketPlace, we focus in three areas that really can't be separated today with technology the way it is. and that's in application transformation, service and support modernization, which is really what our talk today revolves around, and then client and mobile device modernization. All three of those are very tightly related these days with the way things are going. So in respect to that and what we do, I thought it was important to then just note very quickly that that Advanced Marketplace has been recognized by Forrester as one of the top ITSM implementation companies in North America. They recently released for their first ever ITSM implementation company wave, where they identified some folks in the market who had strong ITSM consulting presence, went through a process very similar like they do on tools, and put those folks in there. I think the part that's most important to us, to Advanced Marketplace, specifically about the wave, was that with respect to their ranking on modernization, a strategy for legacy modernization, we had the highest scores in that category, which is really where our focus is. So we were very pleased with that, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of background. So now as I walk through the presentation, the practical approach to CMDB, you'll understand where we're coming from. So with that being said, today's CMDB landscape, what I tend to classify most of the clients that we see and people that I talk to in the industry today, I try to put them into three different buckets. They're either achieving with their CMDB, and that means they have a very well-defined CMDB structure. There's good executive sponsorship for the CMDB and for the costs associated and the resources associated with maintaining that CMDB. It's supporting key processes for the organization. And probably the most important part of that is that last bullet is a recognized value to IT. So often we will talk to clients who say, yeah, we have a CMDB and we're doing really well with it, but when we dig a little deeper and ask them, well, what is the value that it's delivering to the organization? How is it helping the organization? They struggle to articulate that, and that's usually a red flag for us that maybe they're achieving some things, but they aren't getting to the end goal of the CMDB. And then not by accident that you see the two bigger circles, struggling and abandoned. And we have a lot of customers and clients and people that we talk to in the industry, particularly in this struggling category. And so you hear a lot of the same themes when you start talking to folks about CMDB. Well, it's too difficult, it's too much effort, we can't keep the data, we're struggling to keep our data current, we can't get cooperation from all the different organizations. You know, these guys own this tool and they won't let us get access to it. And so they're really struggling. They hear the industry pundits say they need a CMDB. They're trying to get there, but really struggling to make that happen. And then the last bucket is quite frankly, we come across a number of organizations who have just abandoned the concept of a CMDB altogether. They said, we don't need it. I've got Harry, he's been here for 50 years and he knows everything there is to know, so I just go ask him if I need it, which, by the way, is a really bad place to be if you're an organization. People say, well, we're not mature enough for CMDB, so we're just, there's no value for it. We don't really see a value in, and I would submit that that's a really bad place to be, and so I'm going to go through an analysis with you guys today of why a CMDB and having one and having a strategy around it is more important than ever. So before I start to go into the approach, I want to actually step back in time with everybody, and I want to look at two things that have been happening concurrently. And so the first one is, I really want to start talking about, let's look at this concept of a CMDB and how did it evolve and why are so many people struggling with it, or why have people abandoned? And so when you think about ITIL and the concept of CMDB, that really didn't start getting sticky here in the U.S. probably until maybe 10, maybe 12 years ago. Canada, Europe were a little bit faster to adopt it, but it's fairly new in some ways, in some respects, to the U.S. for really getting on board with it. And so when you talk about a CMDB in the early years, ITIL v1, configuration items were very simple. It was, how do I discover my desktops? How do I discover my servers? And do some kind of auto-discovery tool that shows me every possible attribute that I may ever want to know about that CI. And so, that was what fed your CMDB, and that was kind of the early picture of a CMDB. So you would have a collection of CIs, like I said, desktops, servers, some software, and that would feed this CMDB. And so in the early years, that struggle started right away. And the reason why it started right away, right, was that organizations are way more complex than just being able to say, well, here's all my CIs, and if I just put them in this single database, then I got everything I need, and I can fulfill every process I need and meet the needs of the business, because it's that cut and dry. I mean, the reality is that most organizations today are extremely distributed, very heterogeneous. They have systems that don't talk to each other. They have different systems feeding different business purposes. So you take all that stuff together, and you come out with this concept of configuration management system. So ITIL v3, you start to really talk about a system, and that really is kind of driven by the fact that for most people it's impractical to have one single database that has every piece of information you might ever need to support every process you might need to ultimately support the business. You throw into that asset information, HR information that people may want, and you start to look at all these other applications that are out there that may have to or may feed a CMDB or pull from a CMDB. We throw in the onset of cloud services, and now your data is not even at your place anymore, it's somewhere else. And all of that hodgepodge of information basically has to go, and what everybody tells you is, well, this data's got to help make sure change management goes smoothly and help me resolve incidents more quickly. And by the way, it's got to feed up to my service catalog, so if somebody needs goods or services, the CMDB provides that information so we know if we have it in stock or not. And infrastructure planning, I want to know if I need to initiate some kind of, what my savings potential would be if I did a VM virtual migration of servers and so on and so forth. And so it just quite frankly becomes very daunting. And that's where most people are. They're overwhelmed by the idea of what a CMDB has to be. And so once you get your arms around all of this stuff, and then you start to go, okay, well, let's get started with our CMDB. You go, well, we got to get executive sponsorship. We got to figure out what our governance requirements are. Where is this data going to come from? What are our sources? What processes are going to be fed? What are the CI types? And with those CI types, what are the relationships they're going to have? What are the attributes I need to track? I got to define my CMDB structure, the levels. I mean, do I have CIs and applications or services or systems? And so once you even start to get through this process, next thing you know, you've designed this enormous CMDB, and it's been 3 years. You probably got a new CIO by now, and you're starting all over again. And so the challenge of doing a CMDB from the ground up is just not practical, and I would submit it doesn't even make sense. And the reason why it doesn't make sense is where I'm going to go to now. It's because over this last 10 years that we've talked about the evolution of ITIL and CMDB, some other really interesting things have been going on in the market, right? So IT consumerization, I assume everybody here's heard the term. Here's what IT consumerization means to me. It means that the layers of an organization between IT and the consumer are disappearing. It's happening every day. It's happening extremely rapidly, and businesses and entire industries are being transformed. And so why is that? Well, if you look at the things that have happened from a technology perspective, right, obviously the explosion and pervasiveness of the web and Web 2.0 and the comfort of the end user and the IT and the consumer with online shopping, cloud services have come into play. The impact of mobility, smartphones, and tablets cannot be overemphasized. I don't know if anyone caught, but this past week, Microsoft just announced that they are no longer going to follow their traditional upgrade cycle for their Windows operating system. They are moving to smaller upgrades that are pushed more often with features inside them. The thing that's driving that is what's happening in the industry, what the effect and the impact that mobility is having on the industry. So even Microsoft, in one of the most prolific operating system pieces of software in the world, is having to adjust to what's going on in the market. The other piece of that is relationship. The relationship between the consumer, the internal customers you have, the external customers, it's changing. The impact of social media has literally changed and transformed entire industries. With that, and with the onset of the technology, there is an expectation by every consumer that they want their information immediately. They want it on demand. I mean, how many people on this call today, if I could see you all and get a raise of hands, have been on their smartphone, downloaded an app because they wanted to try something or do something, the app didn't work, they uninstalled it immediately and went and found another app. I've done it many times. It's the nature of the industry and the day and age that we live in, and businesses need to transform and modernize because of it. So this is the part that I'm going to slow down here for a second before we get into CMDB, because this is really, really important in my estimation, and it's why our organization has a modernization focus. What I really want to do is talk about specific instances of how businesses are being transformed and being changed, and companies that you wouldn't think about having this as a challenge, or even industries that you would never think technology is even playing a part in. So if you look at eBay, most folks may not know, but in 2013, more than 50% of the items posted on eBay for sale worldwide, more than 50% of them were posted by a mobile device. Now that's huge, and you think about it, it makes sense. I can take a picture really quick of it right there with my camera, my smartphone, right to the app, and it's very easy. It's easier than grabbing a regular camera, taking a picture, walking over your desktop, right? But that's a staggering number when you think about eBay, that 60% of their posts are by smartphones. Well, last year, they posted an Android upgrade. I don't know if it had the same impact on Apple. I'm an Android user. But they posted a mobile update to their app, and it broke their app completely. And when it broke their app, they had to uninstall their app, reinstall the new app, and then they sent everybody, at least everybody that was an Android user I know, actually got an email apology from eBay for that app breaking. So you think about a company like eBay. This is a .com company. We associate them with being the tech-savvy guys. They're having to respond because the very nature of their business is now so dependent on mobility, and they're having to respond and react to what's happening from a mobile perspective. You look at, I'll take Hulu for example. Hulu, services like Hulu, Netflix, and those types of folks. When you look at today, most of the folks on the call today, if you are a cable subscriber, you're probably seeing more features from your cable company than you have in the last, 10 years. You've probably seen more in the last year and a half, right? We're starting to see you can watch your shows on demand. The pay-per-view options are expanding. Now you can record more shows on your DVR than you were ever able to do before. The cable companies are not doing that because they love you guys that much. They're doing it because there's companies like Hulu and Netflix that are popping up, leveraging new streaming technology and putting pressure on them to improve their service levels to their customer base or risk losing them. Same thing with Ford. If I take Ford, that's just a representation of the auto industry. Today, it's extremely important that someone be able to go online, configure the F-150 pickup they want, and price it exactly on the Ford website, and get every option picked out, know exactly the cost associated with it, compare and contrast models. That's huge for Ford. They've transformed the way we buy cars. Folks like TrueCar and Kelley Blue Book and all these folks with their online information, you can go into a dealership today and know exactly what you need to pay to be getting a good deal. That is completely changing the way the automotive dealership business has to operate. They all have online presences. You don't see the haggling and negotiating like you used to. So it's transforming their business. I won't park on Macy's, but the future, the future of the retail industry, it's already been changed tremendously. Everybody knows that. Most people here shop online. But the future, the malls of the future, I suspect, and people have already kind of prognosticated that it's coming. The malls of the future will be smaller. There'll be less inventory in them. You'll go into these stores to determine what you want. You may have virtual fitting rooms, and then by the time you get home, your package is dropped off on the door. Who knows? Maybe Jeff Bezos will be delivering it by a drone. But either way, that business is changing, is transforming. And then the last one is that picture of the cab, and this one I think is probably the most compelling. And normally in a live audience, I would ask folks for input on that. But if you look at it, the taxi industry, most people would go to the taxi industry. They're not going to be impacted by technology. And then you look at companies like Uber and Lyft, who have popped up here seemingly overnight, and have literally transformed the taxi industry and the car service industry. Ashley, I know, is in Colorado. Cheryl's in Colorado right now. I mean, there's a huge push. The taxi lobby is trying to get Uber regulated because of the impact it's had on their business. In Berlin, Germany, they have basically said, Uber, you're not allowed to operate here. We have a regulated taxi car service union, and you're not allowed to operate here. And Uber said, tough, we're operating. So I don't know how all that shakes out, but the most important part of what I've basically been covering here is that for any of you folks on the phone, if you think you're in an industry that can't be touched by technology or in a position in IT where the things that you're working on are many levels away from the IT consumer, I'm here to tell you that the future says the trend says differently, and the future is you're just one really slick app or one really cool invention or great idea away from that industry being transformed. So I say all that, and that brings us back to where we are today. We've had the ITIL CMDB evolution. We've had all these things going on in the industry. And so it begs the question, okay, so do I need a CMDB? Is a CMDB important? What's the approach I should take? And what I would tell you is that because of the things that are going on in the industry, it's more critical now than it's ever been for IT to have a CMDB or a CMS, Configuration Management System, whichever term you want to use. It's extremely, extremely important. But it's extremely important for some very specific reasons. And all the things that a CMDB can do still apply. So whether it's the better alignment of IT projects right there at the top and business objectives, which is an important one, or all these other ones that you see on this list. I mean, mitigating the risk of doing changes, making sure that you're not going to have collisions on applications if you're going to do a change because you can see in your CMDB what's coming down the pike. Supporting any kind of availability or capacity decisions. We've had a client who used the application maps that we helped them develop in their CMDB to actually do a data center consolidation. They consolidated from 6 data centers down to 1. They outsourced that consolidation to a huge, one of the big boys, but they leveraged the CMDB data that we had to validate each time before they would take down some servers or move some apps to the new data center. They would validate it against the CMDB to make sure they had all the components, make sure they weren't going to take something offline that they weren't expecting. And so the CMDB has enormous value, wonderful value, because of the way things are changing in the market and the disappearing layers between IT and the consumer. It absolutely is important that the customer makes sure, or that IT makes sure that they are delivering value through that CMDB. And so what I would tell you is that in order to do that, we can't do it from the bottom up. I mentioned it before. We can't start with, let me go discover my 30,000 assets and 2.6 million attributes. Let me go figure out of those CIs, which ones of those CIs I put together to make a bigger CI, and of those bigger CIs, which ones I put together to make a service. And that approach will not work. The industry and technology and the consumer are not waiting for that type of process for anyone. So what's the answer? What's the approach? What's the revision? Well, the reality is it's start at the end or start at the top. And what I mean by that is get as close to the customer, whether that customer is a consumer, an internal customer, whether the customer can even be a really important strategic business initiative for you that year. Start there and work backwards. Don't try to get all the stuff in there and then figure out what to do with it. The way most of us have been trying to do this for years is basically saying, I know I've got a journey, so I'm going to start walking. And we didn't have the direction or a destination. And what I'm saying today is, let's start at the destination and let's take a services-driven approach to how you implement a CMDB. And so this requires some analysis from every organization. I mean, you have to look at, first you have to identify what are the strategic services that I provide. You know, for eBay, for example, it could be their mobile app. That's one of the most important things that eBay has right now that's crucial for their business. But in everybody here who's on this WebEx today, you may have a different strategic service that you provide to your internal, external customer. It could be that corporate initiative. For the one client I mentioned, it was a data center consolidation. That was important for them last year. It was a $100 million project that represented many, many hundreds of million dollars of savings over the years. So the point being is, don't get CI focused. Let's focus on what's important to the customer and to the company, and let's start at that point. And by doing this approach, we really do get inherent benefit out of doing that. Because if we start closer to the customer, start closer to the pain point, closer to the important initiative, we're already potentially going to have a CMDB that's providing higher value if we get it into production. We're going to have something that's going to have a more positive impact to the organization. We're going to be addressing stuff that's touching important stuff. So if the CMDB is working right, it's reducing risk. Well, if it's reducing risk on the really important stuff, we're reducing risk where our exposure is highest. That's huge. And probably one of my favorites is, if we take this approach and we focus on the things that are important and focus further up the consumer stream, if you will, IT no longer has to spend time validating and justifying what they do to support the organization, because it becomes obvious and transparent to everybody in the organization the value that they're bringing. So, with that being said, how do we start doing this? the way we start doing it is incrementally. You cannot do this as a massive undertaking with all kinds of information in there and trying to leverage it and create relationships. It's pick one of those services or pick two of those services or a service and an initiative. Let's focus on those, and let's build out that map, that service map. What does that look like to the customer? And we're going to see an example of one here in just a moment. But for whoever that is, whether it's eBay and their mobile app, or maybe it's Ford and their configuration, online configuration tool, or maybe it's the cable company who's getting ready to revamp the interface on their cable box to their consumer. I mean, there are just many different options, and it's obviously specific to each industry that everybody here today is in. But figure out what those service maps are, those important ones, and then let's take it in small pieces. Let's define what are the key CIs for that service, right? And this really starts to help us define the scope and the reach of what we want to do. We have to do an analysis of, based on that service, I mean, am I going to change it often? Is it something, in the case of like a mobile app, where I'm going to have frequent upgrades, so release management is going to be important, so I need data to help me support release management and change management. Am I going to support end users who complain about the mobile app or have issues with the mobile app? I mean, so do I need to have an incident management portion of this? Is IT actually going to take on support of the mobile app directly, or is that going to go somewhere else? If that's going to go, say, to the app dev QA group, then maybe that's part of you draw the line there in the scope and reach of this initial service map. You go, nope, that's still outside this. And get yourselves a manageable service, a manageable map, and then, very important, manage the granularity to match the value. This is kind of the old so what rule, right? What I would say to everybody when you're going through what kind of CIs and attributes and all to bring into your CMDB, always ask yourself, so what? I mean, well, I have 642 attributes I can track on every desktop. So what? Well, those 642 attributes tell me everything I need to know about that HP model. So what? Well, that HP model, that helps my service desk customer or my service desk know the computer. When Joe Smith calls in, it knows his computer. So what? Until you can get to a point where there's true value in answering that so what question, you really need to look hard at, do I need that level of data inside my CMDB? Data for data's sake is not a good approach. And then the final piece of that, those service maps, is understanding the processes. And you got to understand the processes from both ways. You got to understand the processes that are going to enable the maintenance of that service map, but also understand the processes that service map is going to support, right? And make sure you have the data there for all those. And what happens over time, you take this map and you define your scope and your reach, and you manage your granularity, and you have beginnings of a very simple CMDB, which tells you the data sources needed, tells you what tools or integrations may be needed to make that happen, right? What level of automation may or may not happen. You got to keep governance in mind, so there's always going to be some compliance component to that. But it's manageable because we're doing it for a specific service map. We're not trying to do this for the entire organization. So to take all that stuff and really kind of give you a for example, what I've done is I've kind of developed a little sample map here, if you will. And this is, I took online banking as an example. It's an easy one for any of the banking type clients out there. But mobile banking is huge. I don't know how many folks, I can't see a show of hands, but I use my phone and my banking app probably more often than I use a computer, because to me it's actually easier. The bank I bank with, their app is actually very, very good, and so I use that more often than I even use the web or a computer. So if I'm a bank, I may say, okay, my mobile banking app is a critical service for me. It's critical to customer retention, customer success, potentially getting new customers with the app, because everybody knows that smartphones are super important to people in their lives today. And so you may say, okay, in my entire core banking application, I'm going to focus on the mobile user experience for this initial piece of the CMDB. And so what you do is you start to now say, from the mobile user experience, what are the components that I need to have functioning and supporting and always available and always up and are the most critical. And perhaps the bank says, okay, we got to have customers who can pay their bills with their mobile app and do their account management. So look at their balances, transfer money between the accounts. So bill pay and account management, we're going to keep our scope and our reach at those two pieces for the initial piece of the CMDB. And so you go and you take the components of your bill pay application and go find the databases and the servers and any of the information below those and the data below those that's critical to the bill pay app, and being able to update it and change it and manage versions of it and make sure that that app is reliable and functions and performs as you would want it to. And then you go, sorry about that. And then you would go and you would do the same thing for the account management side. And you would take the pieces of the account management component and you would take those, and there may be some overlap with the pieces of the CMDB, and you pull that all in, and now you have developed a service map for your mobile banking app that helps to do all those things we did in the list, or that we showed in the list earlier: mitigate risk, align IT and business, ensure compliance. It does all those things for the bill pay and account management functions of the mobile app. Now, before I move on here, so this is about the time usually when I'm having a conversation with a client or doing one of these speaking engagements where a customer will say to me, and it's usually a customer who's already said that they're struggling, that they're not getting value out of their CMDB. They'll say, yeah, but that's just it's just a mobile banking app. That could only be, maybe that's only 15 servers or 20 servers, and I've got 1,000 servers in my infrastructure, and why would I ever want to do this? And so you have to point out, well, if you have 1,000 servers and you're not getting any value out of your CMDB, isn't it better to be focused on 20 servers and actually be getting value of it? Because remember, this is about, for too long, we've not been focused on the value that's been driving, the value that needs to be driven by the CMDB, and for too long, we haven't been able to articulate that value because we haven't been able to achieve it. So, once you do that, you just review, refine, repeat, right? So that there's a process then. You move to the next service map. What's the next critical map that I'm working on? So for that banking example, maybe it was saying, okay, well, we're going to add credit card processing and and whatever the other one was to the mobile app now. So I'm going to bring those pieces in. But perhaps it's something totally different. Perhaps it's our ATM application needs an update because it needs to provide some new features because the technology for ATM machines is changing. And so it's important for me to focus on the components that are going to make up the ATM application service, which is obviously behind the scenes but absolutely impacts your consumer. And so you may go and do ATM next, and it may have no parts that touch the CMDB or the service map that you just created. But that's okay, because if it's now delivering value that improves your ATM performance and gives the customer a better experience, you now have two services inside your CMDB that are having a positive impact on the business. So I'm going to try to bring this in for a landing. So in conclusion, probably the thing that's most important to point out here is that the hardest step really is the first one. I mean, I often have customers, clients, people that I speak to about this approach who they say, I mean, it usually goes like this: yeah, I see that, I get it, but, well, no, this makes perfect sense, but, and they struggle with the fact that I got 25,000 CIs in my database already. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but let's go pick one or two of those maps or one or two of those services we talked about, and let's start getting value out of 100 of those 25,000. And so it's really a matter of trying to get folks to flip things on their end and look at things from the end user, the service side down, because it's a lot easier to start at the destination and work your way back into the critical pieces that you need to worry about. So, again, in summary, today, for most part, CMDB still remains an untapped asset for most organizations. You know, I can go back to the whole achieving versus struggling versus abandon. The most important part of having a CMDB, especially in light of the changes that are going on in the market, is that the CMDB needs to provide value closer to the customer, and IT, quite frankly, needs to modernize, needs to transform so that IT is no longer just a supporter of technology and an enabler. I mean, technology is how business happens today. It's so pervasive. It's the fabric through which almost every industry is operating. IT can no longer just be a support organization. They have to be the delivery mechanism for businesses to compete and win in their space. And I just kind of just said that. So IT and business alignment, it's imperative. I mean, you know, consumerization, it's just the things I said. It's really important. Consumerization, we touched on that. Modernization is important. Governance, I mean, we're being faced with more and more regulation. I don't know if anyone saw last week, hopefully this customer is not on this call, there was a healthcare network, a hospital last week who had a huge HIPAA breach, enormous HIPAA breach. And it kind of went something like this. Lady went in for some it sounds like rather embarrassing treatment. Ex-boyfriend who probably, it sounds like, had some sore feelings, actually paid a woman at the hospital, an employee somewhere in the financial side of the hospital, to access that lady's file and print out a copy of her medical bill with the treatment on there, and then he went and posted it on Facebook. Enormous HIPAA breach, right? And while it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with CMDB, it again just points to the fact that modernization and the things that we're dealing with, every one of our organizations is dealing with today, are changing the way business gets done. It's changing the way we have to secure the business, the way we have to deliver the business. And so we all need to get in that mindset of doing things a little bit differently. So again, step one is start at the end. Get as close as you can to, I say consumer. Depending on your organization, it may not be an actual, a consumer, a buyer. It could be you're strictly B2B, and so your consumer is another business. But get close to as close to whoever your customer is. And IT, your customer is no longer just Joe Smith who's sitting at the phone inside the same building as you. It's the business customer. Identify your key business services initiatives and define from the top down. And again, in the end, what you end up with is services that will drive value to the company while they're being supported by IT processes and only necessary data. You'll get to a point where, again, applying the so what rule, maybe you've got 100 different services that you're providing in your organization. As you go through this process, you may get to a point where you've now done 10 or 12 of these most critical services, and you go, you know what? wow, we're getting a lot of value out of these 10 or 12 services, and the other 88 to 90, we don't necessarily need to make the effort. We're not going to get the value. The business is not going to get the value to be able to go through the full CMDB process for those pieces. So again, it's really a value-driven type of case here. Over time, doing it that way, your IT, your CMDB are going to be focused on what's most important to the business. So that is the conclusion. I'm right at 45 minutes. And Ashley, if you wanted to open up for questions, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate your presentation. We are going to open it up for questions. So, Bill, if you want to move your desktop away so that you can see the chat functionality on the left-hand side, we will take questions now.
All right, let me see. How do I do that here? Is that this? Open chat controls? Questions. Have I done what you wanted me to do, Ashley? I'm not sure.
Yeah, are you looking at the questions and I don't see any questions at this time.
Yeah, I do not see any questions, so then good. I'm looking at the right thing. But if anyone has any, please.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, we will be sending out a recording to all of you guys who have registered for the webinar. So please look for that in your inboxes today. I do appreciate all of your time, and we will be following up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.